Hello, I'm Corey, and today is day 17 of my 100-day project, and my version, which is 6 by 6 and 6. What I do in my 100-day challenge is I'll take 6 by 6 paper and I'll make a variety of different paper projects with it. And today's is different. Up till now I've done tutorials, but today is going to be more of a process video. And rather than show you step by step how I make something, I'm going to talk you through my process of making something so that you can emulate it regardless of what product you're using. It works equally well with modern paper lines, if you're vintage, if you're doing junk journals, if you're doing planners, whether you're making a scrapbook page, the concept is the same. And today is focusing on scraps. And I've been working in a Disney book, among other things, and I've had a lot of scraps. I cut down a little piece at the end. And so I wanted to show you how I can use those scraps and how you can use those scraps regardless of what your project is. And so when I'm working with scraps, I kind of sort them into two categories. Long, thin strips, which is a lot of them, and then short, chunkier strips, little bits. And I will cut them down and put them all out, and I'll cut the little bits and put them in bowls for punches and such. But the reason I do this is a lot of times when we're making embellishments, the process itself can be kind of overwhelming. There's all the things. There's paper, and there's lace, and there's ink, and there's gems, and there's die cuts, and there's washi, and there's blingy things and paper clip, and there's just stuff, lots of stuff, which is cool because it gives us the items that we like, but it can be overwhelming as you're putting them together. So I have a process, and I kind of wrote down my process and shared it, and I'm hoping that maybe it will help you be more successful with your embellishment process as well. So the first thing I do is I gather strips of paper with the collection that I'm working with, or just any random strips, and I cut them down into random height, random width, rectangular pieces. And I just put all these together because, like I said, I don't want to make this a process or a tutorial, but more of what my process is. So I take all these little strips and I cut them down, and I lay them out in front of me. And then that's my first step. And then my second step is I ink because I like ink. But if you don't ink, just lay them out. And then you trim them as needed, and you just start laying your pieces down, laying in front of you. I generally use an odd number, but depending on what I'm going to use it for, sometimes I'll put clusters of 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4, and then there's a fifth one on top here. So there's 5. And then here's 4. And you can see there's different, sorry guys, I kind of went out there. There's different numbers of pieces. There's different sizes of pieces. Maybe I'll put, I'll use edge scissors or a random punch to give it a punched edge. And then I just start laying pieces down and on top of each other. And when I do this, I don't generally glue them down right away. I will wait a minute and make sure I like the way it looks before I glue them down. But then I just start randomly gluing them down. And the number one, like this one, it's bigger, wider. These are 6 by 8 papers. So when I was trimming them down, I had some bigger pieces left. You can see here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7, so I might use this for something larger. But the key to this is just don't overthink it, because you can make yourself a crazy person, moving them around and moving them around, and just start laying them down and gluing them. So that's your second step. You cut them into different shapes and sizes. I usually sort them by color so I can make sure I have a mix of colors and patterns. And then I just start laying them down, putting a little bit of glue, and then I trim it as I need it. If I need it to be a little longer, I'll grab a longer piece, or a little bit shorter, I'll grab a shorter piece. And, you can make them as wide as you want, or, this one is kind of narrow. This one was kind of narrow. You just play with them. This one I had a larger scrap of red, and so I thought I could use this for a pocket or a front of a cover. But the bottom line is I'm using up the strips. Okay, so I cut the strips, I inked the strips, and then I laid them out, and then I glued them together. And then I like the texture of sewing. So I'll go to my sewing machine, and let's see if you can see here. And I'll use maybe a zigzag stitch or a standard stitch. I find with paper, it's better to have a longer or a wider stitch. The tighter the stitch is, the more likely you are to tear the paper. So I use a larger number. I make my zigzag a little wider or a little longer, and then I'll make my standard stitch a little bit longer. I usually use a 3. Okay, so that's, if I'm going to stitch, I do that next. And I know that some people love loose threads. It's not my thing. So what I do is on the back of this, because this isn't going to be free floating in on the card or in the journal or wherever I use it, I use just photo tabs and I'll tape down those ends. I'll pull those loose thread ends and I'll lay them down. So now I have a whole bunch of bases, and you know, however many scraps I had indicates however many bases I've got. And then I will do a focal piece. And what I mean by that is I will pick an image, usually 1 to 3 images that I want to focus on for that particular page. I didn't stop at that step, so I don't have a ton that are just there, but the images are my next. So like this one, I wanted to use this particular bow. This one was a pieced together item with a cloud and a heart that I wanted to use. So I grabbed those images. This one I wanted to use stars. So I'll grab, like, usually die cuts or punches or little, you know, you can use things like little itty bitty envelopes, whatever. I'll grab a focal piece or 3 and I'll start playing around with those. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just pull out my bin. I'll sort them into bins, like some punched pieces I've got or some die cuts that I've got, and I'll lay them out in a bin and I'll just start putting them down. Do I like it? Do I dislike it? I'll move it around until I'm happy with it. And after I've done my focal pieces, I lay them down, but I don't glue them. And the reason I don't glue them is maybe I want to tuck something underneath it. Maybe I want to do something like this one here. You know, I've laid my pieces out. Here I wanted to use a couple stars because it kind of went with the colors. And I used a ticket, but I wanted something a little extra. So I'll lay them down, but I don't glue them yet. Because maybe like this one, then my following step or my 4th step is to add words or sentiments. So here my cloud and my heart were together, but they were blank. So I cut apart a die cut or one of the cut aparts in the paper pack, and I added it to it. So before I glue down my embellishments, I'll figure out where I want my words to go. Like this particular was just word was just a die cut, and I added something on top of it. Let's see. Whoops, sorry about that. This particular word was a rub-on, and this was a die cut that I wanted to use. And so I don't start gluing things down until I'm sure they're pretty much where I want them. And I still, even when I've got the words there, I still don't glue them quite yet. I wait to glue them until I decide if I want any dimension. And what I mean by that is, here, this is another way. You can see these aren't strips, but these are, you know, it's the same concept. I had some scrap pieces. This was a negative space of a die cut. I laid them down. I didn't sew this particular one because of the size. But then I put my embellishments. My embellishment was the star and the star. And then I added my words. I layered a couple words. And when I liked where it was, I started to lay it down. And when I add the words, I think, do I need some dimension? Does it need a little bit of, you know, a little foam tape or a little bit of dimension to make it stand out more, to get a different visual effect? So before I glue down my focal piece or my words, I decide if I want any of that dimension. This particular one, I used a real thin, let's see if you can see it in there, a real thin mounting foam, and then I just used some thread, some loose thread that I had, and I jumbled it up and put it behind it. So I wanted a little bit of dimension off the flatness of the card, so I used a thin foam. Once I've decided where I want things to go, that's when I add the glue. I've got my dimension, I've got my words, I've got my die cuts, and I kind of know where I want them to go. And then that's when I start laying them down. And you know, maybe some of these are a little more embellished than you'd like, but that's okay. You can go really simple. This was just a cut apart, and then I cut this out of a different cut apart. And this is just a punch with a staple. So if you don't want it as quite as elaborate, you don't have to make it that way, but you have the option of doing that. And so I've got this big old pile of pieces, basically, that I can now just put in my stash and put in my journal or my album or whatever it is when I'm ready to build it. So that's kind of my process. And then at the very end, see, here I use scraps to build the base of a scrapbook page. You know, on this particular one, because it's a 6x8 album, it'll work like this. But I can do it vertically or horizontally. And again, these are just scraps and they're sewed on. And I'll wait till I add a picture to put my final word or my final embellishment on those. Same thing here. So once I've got them cut, laid, sewn. If you're going to sew, you don't have to, just glued. My focal pieces, my words are my sentiments. And if I'm going to be adding any dimension, either with foam or staples or twine, I add those. And then the last piece is what I call the finishing pieces. Maybe I want sequins or dots or ink splatters or some glaze or sparkles or whatever. Depending on how I'm using it, I will do it either right then or I'll put it together. For example, this particular one, maybe I'll put a charm and hang a charm down from there. But I've got my dimension, I've got my words, I've got this. But in order to tie it to whatever's on the background, I'm going to add some enamel dots. And so maybe I'll add an enamel dot here and here, but then when it's laid down on my page, I might want an enamel dot here just to carry my vision through it. So I'll put the item I plan to use with it, I'll paper clip it until I'm ready to do the next step, because I like to have a whole bunch and then put all my project together. So that is a way that I can kind of finish it. And this one, this particular one. So I've got, cut apart some words, added a die cut. But when I'm ready to put this on my page, maybe over here, I'll put this on either my card or my junk journal. And maybe I'll put this one over here or down here, just to kind of carry my eye through and create movement on my piece. And so when I have something like that, I'll just paper clip them together so that I can use them. I can use them together. And I remembered that that's how I wanted to go. Here's another example, a short, quick example. Like this was one of those cards, cut apart cards that said celebrate. Well, we were celebrating my birthday the last time we were there, but I didn't want a big tag. So food was a big deal for us in Disneyland the last time we went. They had some great stuff. So we did some pictures with food. Well, so I cut out just the letters I wanted to celebrate and made it say eat. So you don't have to use the die cuts or the cut aparts on your paper exactly the way they come. This one was all about hello and hi and such, and I just covered that up and added my elements. And here, so I've got an enamel dot and I've got an enamel dot. And when I actually put this in the book, maybe I'll put 2 here and 1 up over in this corner. So I'll add that to kind of tie it through and carry it through. So step process, gather my scraps and cut them, ink them if I'm going to ink them, and then lay them down and glue them lightly. Sew them or not, add my focal pieces, lay them down but don't glue them. I add my words or my sentiments. Again, lay them down but don't glue them. Then I decide on my dimension. Am I going to put something in the back like the string or the foam or what have you? Am I going to add things like staples or brads or eyelets or whatever I might be adding? And then my last step, do I want any glaze? Do I want dimensional glaze? Do I want enamel dots? Do I want sequins, glitter, dots, ink? And that's how I build my embellishments. And one more tip, because I like tips. When you have your cut aparts from your paper or your die cuts, you don't have to use them exactly as they come. For example, if I didn't want this big old bingo card, I'll just cut off the word bingo and use that how I need it. This particular die cut came as a flower, but I didn't really want a flower because we were there in January. So I just punched it out to use Happy Day, and then I can combine that with something else. This was on a real big card, and I loved it for the last page of a book, but I didn't want the big piece, so I just fussy cut out the elements that I wanted. This was on one of those big 6x6 cards, but I want a page that says Mickey Mouse. So I already cut out one of the M's and I'm cutting out the other one. So instead of having two big pieces, I've got two letters that I want, and then I can use letter stickers or die cuts or whatever. So look at your cards or your ephemera with a different eye. So maybe I don't want this ruffle on the smile and I want it to be small. I'll just cut it with my trimmer or my scissors there and just have the element or the piece that I want. So I do that a lot, and you'll see that on some of these things. They didn't necessarily come like this, and this didn't come. It came flat on a different card, but I cut it out and used it in a different way. For example, I really like Are We There Yet, but we didn't go in a VW Bug. So I'll either cover that or layer something on top of it, or maybe I'll use a die cut or a couple die cuts or something like that, but I can still get the sentiment that I want. So that is my suggestion for using scraps, 6x6 scraps. Thank you for watching, and I hope it inspires you to give it a try. Have a great day.